Welcome to today's Informative Friday session, Elevate Your Benefit Open Enrollment Experience, Key Functionality and Enhancements, which is being presented today by Christopher Nola. My name is Molly Velasco. I'll be helping moderate the session today. Please be aware that this session is being recorded. And quick logistical information before we get started, please use the chat feature to ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be sure to address them. There will be a Q&A session at the end where you'll be able to come off mute and ask questions, but please use the chat feature for questions during the presentation. Highly encourage you to take advantage of this time with our consultants today and ask questions and interact. A copy of the presentation and a link to the recording will be sent to all registrants. If you are not a registrant and would like a copy, please send me an email and I'll include you on that distribution, and I will drop my email in the chat here in a minute. So hopefully you're a little bit familiar with Nordic ERP services. If not, just wanted to give you a brief background of some of the services that we offer. So if you're thinking about moving to the cloud, or if you're going through an ERP selection process, Nordic's advisory services offers unbiased ERP reviews and selection services. We can help you identify the benefits of moving to a cloud ERP solution, manage the selection process, and measure the results. If you have already made the decision to move to the cloud, Nordic's prescriptive implementation process will ensure that you follow a best practice approach to get the most out of your software for the least cost in the quickest amount of time. And for organizations that have already made the move to cloud at about 6 months after go live and every year thereafter, we do recommend that you have Nordic perform an optimization assessment to make sure that you've realized the value of your implementation and are taking advantage of the new features that are rolling out every quarter in those CUs. So Nordic is there for you no matter where you are on your ERP journey. We encourage you to reach out to one of our solution experts via our website, or you could shoot me an email and I can put you in touch with someone as well. So now that we've covered some of those highlights, we'll go over this quick disclaimer and then move into today's presentation. So the material in this presentation is in reference to Infor Cloud Suite and is for informational purposes only. We just want to provide you with considerations as you make the best decisions for your organization. Reliance on the information presented without consultation is at your own risk. We highly recommend that you contact Nordic to discuss how solutions can be tailored specifically to your needs. So with that, I will turn it over to today's presenter, Christopher Nola, who is a principal consultant with our HCM team.
Thank you, Molly. As Molly just said, I am Christopher Nola, about 20 plus years in human resources systems. I'm based out here on the West Coast, and just a little bit about me. I do have a personal goal with my wife to visit all 63 U.S. national parks. We are closing in on number 40 in a few weeks, so there you go. Today's presentation, as we stated, is about open enrollment, and here's roughly the agenda. We're just going to go over a little bit of overview, get into enrollment setup, because as much as that may seem like overly technical, I want you to take away from this not so much writing down furious notes on how to do it, but more to recognize that it's not overly cumbersome. It has a lot of different bells and whistles that you can turn on, turn off, but to work through it. And then I'll give you a glimpse of the user experience. So whatever we set up, what does that look like from a user perspective, some additional features. I do want to touch on beneficiary changes because that's a new enhancement that, although is separate from open enrollment, I do think it's, a very close sibling of open enrollment, and it intersects, and I want to bring that out. Obviously, we'll also have questions, and throughout you can ask questions as we've stated. Also, this presentation is sort of multifaceted for different groups. There's some of you that maybe have never used the open enrollment product. There are others that have been using it, but probably use it, maybe you've used it and you just keep copying from the last version each year and you just keep moving forward. And so you really haven't maybe taken advantage of the last few releases or even the last few years of releases that might add some better user experience, a little more fluid. They get a better experience as they go through it. And so hopefully you can pick out some nuggets on that. So let's just get into what is open enrollment. Now, open enrollment's part of the enrollment events, and enrollment events there's three main enrollment events: open enrollments, life events, and COBRA events. So obviously we're focusing on open enrollment, and they really control how items are displayed, and they also include a set of ranges. So when is it available and when does it become effective? So open enrollment is classic, right? You have a certain window, whether that's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks, and we all know it doesn't matter how long you keep it open, 50% don't do it until the last 3 days. That's been proven statistically. But nonetheless, the setup is fairly straightforward, although it is, I will admit, a bit embedded, but you do go through a series of processes, and there is an order of the build, and we will walk through those fairly quickly. There's the enrollment groups, the organizational rules, the actual enrollment event, and then the enrollment rules. So going into enrollment groups, what are enrollment groups? So enrollment groups are where you're going to bundle up those benefits and put them into a group. So an example might be a medical, you might call it health, or you might call it medical group, but then what are you putting into that? Those are all your medical plans. So a PPO, an HMO, a WAVE plan. So those are going to be put in there. So first you create the enrollment group, and then you add the plans to that group. So in this case, you're actually going in, and remember that if and you're building that group. So in this case, it was this one's called health. So you're going to build the health group, and you can see that you can choose what's covered. Do you allow for dependence? How do you want certain information to show? What's the criteria on ages? You can see how you can build this in per group. And then remember though, one of the key things is if you check mark required, that's a required group. So when you actually showcase this group, if you mark it as required, you should always have a WAVE plan, because if you don't, then you're forcing them into one of those options that may or may not be available, that may not make sense for them if they have the option to opt out. So here's the case where you've built the actual enrollment group, and then you can see down below, we then add the plans associated with them into that group. So a health plan, and then you have your multiple health plans that are associated in the group. That makes sense. So once you have those groups set up, then you're going to set up organizational rules, and then you attach those groups into the rules. So the organizational rules have three tabs, as you can see. There's the enrollment display, the current benefits, and then the current enrollment groups. And again, on this case where the display, that's going to show how things are displayed. And one of the key things that's really come about over the last year or so is the use of step enrollment and that filter choices based on dependence. And I will show you both of those, and I'm going to focus predominantly on the use of step enrollment. And for those of you who haven't utilized this, because maybe you just haven't had the time to turn it on, you're like, it's good enough, we've been running that way for a while without this step enrollment, I would strongly encourage you to turn it on in your test system. Play with it. Look at it. It has a much more fluid, and you're going to see examples of that. It's just a more immersive experience. It looks cleaner, it's more professional, it's more modern and up to date, and gives you a lot more flexibility. So when you checkbox that step enrollment, you will get additional features that you can utilize, and I'll show you that as we move through. The next section you complete in the organizational rules are the current benefits, and that can showcase, it'll show you, you can state how you want it to be displayed. So you can show, do you want to show, what they're currently contributing, things like of that nature. And then the final step is setting up those groups. Now, this is where you've already set up those enrollment groups. Like I said, the health group that had all those medical plans, and then you're adding those groups into these organizational rules.
Nola, can I
Yeah.
stop you for just a second? Can you stop sharing and reshare? We have some people
Oh,
saying that they
Absolutely.
can't see. Some can, some can't. So maybe we should just try.
It did stop presenting, correct?
It did. Yep, you're good.
All right. Let me represent.
Sorry to disrupt your flow. Okay, I can see our hi Gina. I can see the people that were having problems. Can you guys now see the slide deck? I don't have any no's, so I'll let you keep going and oh, we
I
got
see
thumbs
some
up.
thumbs up.
Cool.
That's
Thank
a
you
good
all.
sign.
Thanks,
I'm
Noah.
now I'm kind of, are the folks, the new folks that join, we'll have to monitor
Oh,
that. But I
oh,
am, oh, you got a comment?
well, we got one no, but let's keep going and maybe Molly, we could email them the
Oh, we
we
got
have a
another one.
few no's.
Yeah, I think what we could do is send you the link to the recording and you can view it that way too.
Okay. We'll keep going and we will get you guys at least a copy of the presentation. Thank you, Molly. Sorry, Nola.
It's quite all right. I'm feeling like I'm losing some of my flock here. Uh, now you have to listen to me, poor things. So as you can see, let's see, you did throw me off there.
Sorry.
It's all right. So what we stated was we talked through the current benefits. We're on that current enrollment groups. And all I was saying was that you're attaching those groups that you had made previously into the organizational rules. So now you're stepping into the actual open enrollment. And although you're sort of saying, well, where did that come from? And it actually, you go into the actual enrollment events, and it depends on how your view is, whether you have the latest view in your admin or not. But one of the ways you get to it is benefits. You can see here enrollment events, and you go through that process to get there, and you actually create an open enrollment for that year. Just getting my pointer here. And that first page, you'll see that it's set up into two tabs, right? You've got details and you've got enrollment rules. And that's what we had talked about before. So we're on step 3 of 4 steps of the build already. So part 3 is that enrollment event. So you create those details, and in the details, it's fairly straightforward, but the main 2 pieces here you're looking for is when's the enrollment date, essentially when it becomes effective, right? Which for a lot of you, it's January 1st, that next coming year. And you've got the enrollment period. So that's your enrollment window. When are the employees able to get in and make those selections, and when are you cutting them off, so to speak? One of the other advantages or little tips, if you will, is once you create it and you love it, you're using it for that year. When you come around the next year, you don't have to start from scratch. You can actually copy that enrollment event and then go ahead and tweak it from there, if you will, for the next year, which is kind of nice, saves you some time, definitely minimizes any errors or things you forgot to check boxes and things of that nature.
Nola, we have a
Yep.
question. Would you
Yep.
recommend creating a new open enrollment event each year or editing and reusing the same one?
I create a new each year.
Thank you very much, sir.
And then our final step, and this is where we'll spend a little bit of time and slides on, which is the actual enrollment rules. And we're going to go through them. You can see when you build the rule for that enrollment, you will see there are, if you can see that screen, there's details tab, there's the enrollment settings, the email, and then the actual benefits. So as you go through, you're going to be able to set up, the rules define what's being displayed to the employee, the content, emails that can be generated, that approach. And with that new step enrollment, in these slides I'm showing you, the step enrollment is enabled, and that enrollment settings are broken up into different areas, and we'll walk through those. The welcome is the first one, but you can see it's video, employee information, dependents, and enrollment. So the welcome screen has, and again, I will show you an example of what that looks like in just a minute. The welcome screen has a lot of features in here. You can do headers, you can do instructions, you can have logos, different links that you can display. As you move into the settings for video, the video settings have been expanded. You can now have up to 5 videos, and you can name them. And it's important that when you put in the link, this is a poor example of a link, I'll be honest, because that's not an embedded link, I can tell. But if you had a video that you want to make sure that it's what they call an embedded URL and not the standard URL. And it's fairly easy to find them. If you're familiar with like a YouTube video, you can find the embed. And why I point that out is because when you go through this, it's not going to open up a separate window and launch them somewhere. The video is actually inside of the open enrollment. They don't leave the actual system, the Infor system, or those screens. It will start playing within the window of the open enrollment session, which again is a very more modern and I think enjoyable process to walk through. Into the employee section, and these are all options, meaning you can display information, you can choose not to display. If you had a survey, if you have to, for them to check whether or not their tobacco status or spouse information. You can show contact information. You can show the emergency contact information. So lots of features when you're just talking about the employee information. Then you get into the dependent settings and whether or not you want to show dependents separately from beneficiaries, together, dependents only with no beneficiaries, and what actions you allow on those dependents, whether they can add them, whether they can remove them, items like that. The next section they'll walk through is the actual enrollment. And again, you'll see that one of the features of the STEP approach is that you can now have gallery views. And galleries, and you'll see this in an example, you can create images for each benefit plan. And I'll show you an example of different images, but again, it gives them a more of a visual cue as well as the words on a screen, if you will. And I think it's a more modern approach and also gives you in here, there is a little trick to setting up those images. It's not really a trick, but those images actually now, the place where you're going to place those images actually live on the plan. So it's not in the open enrollment that you're setting out. You're actually going to the plans itself, and there will be a listing there, and you'll be able to, on the main tab, to add the image for that. And when you get into the enrollment, you can summarize, you can choose, actually on the screen before, I'm going to jump back just a second. This is where you can show how you can review and submit, whether you want signatures, whether you want a checkbox with an acknowledgement statement, all those options exist. And then the last is where you're going to show the summaries and what information do you want to show? Do you want to show side-by-side costs? Do you want to show the flex credits? Do you want to show different messages that appear? And again, you can choose a logo and personalize it on that final setting. So any specific questions, or you've been firing off the answers, Candace, for them?
No, there specific is one is step enrollment available only in multi-tenant, and I'm working on grabbing that for you.
Yeah.
And are there any size recommendations on the image?
Ooh. I believe there is. I just don't know them off the top of my head, but we can easily get that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can go grab it. Thank you very much.
Yep. So this is an actual user experience. So now I've been chattering on and you've been looking at all that gobbledygook. It's not gobbledygook, but you know, setup is setup. So this is how the employee would actually experience what we set up. What's nice of the feature is you can see that when they first start, you'll see this start enrollment, but when they return, it will bring them back to where they left off. And when they first open it up, they'll see this resume enrollment. So again, it's a little more intuitive. It lets them kind of recognize, hey, I know you. I know where you were. I recognize you're coming back in. It personalizes it a bit more. This was the welcome screen. As you can see, you can create, again, its own logo. You can see here's the links that were set up. Here's that opening statement that you can put in here. Fairly straightforward. They did a good job of coloring the button to look more like buttons now. So the next isn't just sitting there against a white background. It looks more like a button. That's what you should push. This is an example of an embedded video. So again, you would have, it'll have the title, it will sit there and you can click and it runs from within the product itself. And they can, immediately click the next if they don't wish, they don't have to watch it. They're not required to make it all the way through. They can just click the next and choose which video they want if you have multi videos loaded in. Next, you're going into the actual, this is the employee information. So we talked about this where you can show contact information, you can show the emergency contact. You can allow for you can make the changes right here, change the contact, and it will launch them and make those, you can make those changes on these screens, which is kind of nice. You can see up above if you had eligibility or tobacco status, and it'll indicate what it is and then whether or not you're allowed to change it. Dependent, here's the dependent information. In this example, we put both of them but separated both dependents from beneficiaries, and you can see those are what are set up between the two. And I'm going to talk more about beneficiaries as well an additional function in just a minute. As you get into the actual enrollment of those plans, this is where those images come into play. So in this example, we have two dental plans, kind of your base dental and this dental plan too. And we did images that are different depending on the plan. Now this is an example. You can create any images you want, and I think you could make them very stark of the different style of plans so that visually they look different. But it also at the same time, you're on the dental page because it looks like a dental, but you did distinguish between the two plans. And these are cards, these are plan cards. So this is representative of a specific plan and a specific tier. So you can see in this case, this person's sitting here, and I'll show you a much more closer view in the next slide. So here you can see they have the status indicator. If they've selected it, it'll say selected, and there's a withdraw button. If it's not selected, it's still available. There'll be, this withdraws and withdraw, it's taxing select. It'll be a select button. But there's other messages that can show up here, as you can see. There are errors and warnings. It can show submitted, where you've actually gone through the open enrollment, you've submitted, there is still time in your window, you're allowed to go back in because it hasn't been finalized, let's say, and you can go in and adjust those. So now they'll say submitted instead of selected, and you can then alter it. You can also click withdrawn, meaning that, and then it'll say withdrawn, which meant you originally selected it and now you've kind of backed out of it. So I think those are really good indicators. Again, it gives them a more visual aspect that, oh, this is what I selected before they get to the end, because we'll see a lot of that where they think they enrolled correctly and then they get to the end and they realize in their summary it's not right, or they go all the way, and I know you've seen this, they submit it and then you look at it and then they call you, or unfortunately they call you January 2nd and say, that's not what I signed up for. Well, it is. Well, that's not what I wanted to sign up for. And so hopefully a lot of these things help to alleviate some of that, so you don't have your benefits team tied up and you don't have a frustrated employee. Here's an example of when you double click on that card. So here's the card. If you click on it, you can open up the card and it will tell you more about the plan. Specifically, you can see the differences. You can see what the enrolled dependents are. You can enroll them. So again, much more user friendly, much more quicker information to them, a little bit more intuitive as you move through the product, sort of less, I call it less black and white words and more visual stimulus. Here's an example when a warning exists. So you can see it there's a warning here. They can click to resolve the warning. It's going to open them back up into that, and there will be some message or you'll be able to tell, oh, you're missing something. Perhaps it's you can't select this because in this case it's individual plus children and there's no children on the plan. You haven't designated a child enrolled in this plan, so that's a problem, right? Again, I think that further limits the interaction or frustration and time spent by the benefits team. This is the review period. So again, prior to them submitting, they can see all the warnings and messages. They can see a cost summary before they click that submit button. And then this is the final where they have submitted it. They can view their confirmation. It kind of gives them that indication of it's okay to walk away now. It's okay to close. You know, you reached the end, if you will. So some of the additional features that I just want to point out through this is
Sorry,
one of them.
Nola,
Oh yeah.
before we keep going, there's a question about warnings. How do you work through the warnings that occur? I think that says where they're allowed to have warnings. Example, a person that is electing an employee and children and does not elect all the children on purpose.
Yes. So you might have 3 kids. They only put on 1 or 2, maybe if you allow multiple, and they didn't put on the 3rd. Well, that wouldn't even trigger a warning, but I see the person's, is this, oh, is that a separate one? So yeah. The allowed warnings are, I admit, you're going to, there needs to be an interaction typically, meaning depending on if the warning is just a soft edit warning, meaning, by the way, did you know, and it's not going to actually, but it still allows them to submit, then, you know, a little bit shame on them. But if there are other ones where a warning wouldn't even show up, like for example, if you only put 2 of the 3 you wanted to, the system's not going to recognize that, oh, you have 3 kids, but you only put 2 of them on because you're in a tier that allows for 2 or 3. So in that case, you know, that's one of those where you have to work through it with the individual, unless I'm misunderstanding the question.
I think that's the question. This is the second question. Is there a way to designate the covered dependents? Oh, I think that was it. So that was good. Is there a way to designate the covered dependents at the time you pick the coverage? The warning after the fact makes it seems like there's a missed step, but at least in our setup, they don't have the ability to check the covered dependents.
So I'm going to talk about that, and I think I'll hit your sweet spot that you're asking about in just a second, and that's that other decision that you make in the setup. And just give me a couple of slides and hopefully we'll land on it. And if not, please let us know
Awesome.
if you have additional questions.
Thanks, Will.
So one of the areas here is the multiple plan prerequisites, and this is really set up in the plan, but I think it's important that you look at that. If you have plans where you need prerequisites, which means, like in this example, hey, you can't be in an HSA, a health savings account, if you're not in a high deductible plan, you know, high deductible health plan. And so you can set that up in the plan settings where you can set up prerequisites. Now, why would I state this when it comes to open enrollment? Because when you get to open enrollment, it's going to give you the hard error when you try to select, right? It's going to say you must be in, it sort of says, stop, do not pass go, you don't get $200. It's here's where you can, in a case it's a hard stop and doesn't allow them to move forward. And I think that if you do have plans that would benefit from a prerequisite, I think you need to make sure and put them in, because I think that will save a lot of bad enrollments, you know, where you're having to go back and say, yeah, this isn't allowed, sorry, but you need to also enroll in this. One of the other, and this is what I wanted to talk about from the previous chat question, which was filter choices based on dependence. And this is really an option of what I call sort of do it now or do it later from the experience of the employee. If you checkbox that and enable that filter choices, what it does is it allows them that as they first start out, it allows them to take the dependents and pre-select, if you will, what they want them to enroll in. And where the benefit of that is when they get down into those screens, like medical plans and dental plans where you have dependents that you're associating. They're only going to see those plans that are available to them instead of all the plans, and they make the selection. So you kind of have to really understand your culture, who your employees are. I definitely encourage you to go into a test system, turn it on, and experience it with it on and experience with it off. Because I do know of some clients where they were like, this is cool, this is great, I think this is beautiful. And then I've had other clients that are like, no, we just don't, we don't think that's the best way to go through enrollment. We would rather them make that decision to add those dependents on the plans themselves as they come to them. So again, it's sort of one way or the other. Do you want to do it at the beginning, or do you want to do it further down into the enrollment process? One of the other areas that is another sort of enhancement that came along not too long ago is in these multi-selects. So when you do get to an area where you're allowed to enroll dependents, you don't have to do them individually. You can actually multi-select now, or multi-deselect, which is a nice feature and a lot more efficient. You can just go click, click, click to enroll 3 at once, sort of all 3 kids, if you will, at the same time. Although this is a little hard to see, there is and this is a very unique setting. Not everybody uses, but if there was a change, and specifically where I see this is in amounts and percentages, which is typically with retirement. And I know that for some of you, it's not even applicable. You use the vendor directly, you direct people. Some folks, though, absolutely use the system to make their election choices. Some of them include retirement in their open enrollment. Some of them don't include retirement as a sort of a step that they want, and that's fine. But for those of you that do and use the system to make changes in terms of their contributions, there's now a feature which is just a change buttons, which is a very straightforward. So they're not really electing the retirement plan. They actually just simply click the change button and they're moving their, let's say, 5% to 6%, hitting submit, moving on. So just wanted to point that out for those that haven't seen that feature. One of the other areas, and I didn't show it in my previous slide, but I did want to show it here, is there's now a button called Return to Enrollment. So when you finish it out, you've submitted it, there is a button that it may seem, because before they were hitting back buttons and other things, now there's an actual button that's Return to Enrollment that'll take them back into their election, and they can go back through if for some reason, even though they submitted, remember, it's not finalized, so it's really still in draft. They can go back and they can reselect, they can resubmit until you actually sort of throw the hammer down and finalize it. So I think that that's a good feature, just that little button. I think I think there are times when the employee just needs to be led a little bit more. They don't know the system. They only know what they see. And I think the more you can just put buttons where buttons should be, and it's obvious what the button means, the better. Just a moment, we're going to talk just a few slides on sort of the administrator view. And although tons of people know this, but I think the folks that don't, there's a couple of just tricks I think that are helpful hints when you're using it. One, there is an automated email in the system. You can set up automated emails. So for example, when they submit, you can have an automatic email that kicks out to them. Great. Says, thank you, we've received it. You can attach the confirmation sheet if you wanted to, or something like that. That's great. You can set up these automations. But when you're trying to administer over the top of open enrollment, I think one of the things, whether it's you have a passive or an active enrollment where you're wanting to you still want them, I think, at least from a benefits administration and culture, typically you want as many to participate as possible. You want them making a true choice, even if it's I'm keeping everything the same. You want them to be actively involved in their benefits. And one of the ways is, we all struggle, I think, with getting them to get through it, to do the process, to go through open enrollment. And one of the quick areas that you can do is you can go in and you can actually just simply sort by a status. So you can sort by whether it's draft or whether they started it, and then simply you would just click all. Once you've got that filtered list, you'd go up and either right click, or you can go up to the ellipsis, the three dots, and simply select email. Have an email template that's already built. Select that email template, and you can send literally within the 2 seconds I talked a blasted email out to that targeted audience. So you could have an email template that's specific for those who have already started. Hey, we noticed you already started, but you have not submitted yet. Please submit by blah, 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 blah. You can have another one that says, by the way, we noticed you haven't started, because they're sitting in draft. And, we strongly, we encourage you to do that. And you can sit there and just within a few seconds, do these targeted blasts. And so instead of that big blanket blast where half of your folks have already done it and they don't need to be nagged, those are the ones that should be applauded, if you will. This is a way to quickly get to those targeted groups of the ones you really want to focus on. And one of the other features is you can bring up in the enrollment area, you can bring up specifically on your open enrollment, you can bring up, and let's say you're on the phone with somebody, instead of it's essentially, think of it like proxy. It's not proxy, but you could take on this in this example. Here's Mona. She's calling you. She doesn't understand something on her screen. You can actually view plan enrollment, and you're going to her screen, what her screen looks like. It's not a live session. It's not like you're seeing her mouse move, but you do see what she sees in terms of her dependents, her information, visually what it looks like on each plan. And you could, if you will, mirror whatever she's doing on that side, or walk her through it and say, okay, now click to the next screen, and you're clicking on yours, she's clicking on hers, and at least gives you the ability to see exactly what she's seeing, instead of you sort of envisioning what the typical person sees. You're going to see specifically what that person sees. So both the view the instructions, which is that front page, those intro slides, and then the actual enrollment area. So just helpful hints, tricks that I've used along the way. So that brings us pretty much through the open enrollment. Now, one of the areas, and this is our final kind of section, if you will, is the beneficiary changes. And these are recent enhancements. And I applaud Infor for doing this. If you noticed in the past, I don't know if you're aware of this, but beneficiaries had to take place, changes to beneficiary had to take place in an event. And I would end up working with clients and building a special enrollment just for beneficiaries, and I would just have it wide open for the year, where they could just go in, almost like a life event, but it was very limited to just beneficiary changes, because that's the only way you could get access, unless they were sending you an email and you were manually changing it or something. It just wasn't clunky. It didn't put the power back in the employees. The employees should be putting their own beneficiary information in. And now you can set up under beneficiaries, and this is in each plan. If the plan allows for a beneficiary, there's going to be an area, and you can see where I'm on a plan, and here's the beneficiary section, and I'll show you a bigger screen here. So where you designate typically to say, oh, there's beneficiaries, now there's a new feature called anytime beneficiary updates. If you checkbox that, now what's going to happen is you're going to be allowed a lot of different options. So it will allow you to, and we'll go through kind of quickly these areas, but the designation option. So that's where you're going to choose whether or not you can have both primary and contingent, whether you want primary only or whether you want primary first. And primary first is you've got to designate the primary before you can go and select the contingents, if you will. There's a designation required, so you can either create a requirement that you must select your primaries and contingents, or a warning. So it's more like a soft edit where it's going to encourage them to acknowledge them. And when it encourages them, it's a warning only, then they can put in the beneficiary, but it doesn't require them to designate, whether they're primary and the percentages. Then there's the spouse primary. So you can either require that, or you can, again, you can not require it, or you can have a warning. And for a lot of you, some of your plans, depending on the plan, I see this a lot in life insurance. It's a requirement that 50% of the primary must be the spouse, unless the spouse signs a certain form that says, I know I could get 50%, I'm waiving that right. And we'll talk about that in the next slide, how you get around that now. And then, of course, you've got the amount or percentages allowed. I think this is a nice feature. Now you can select both, or percent only, or amount only. And I was having some of my clients were having difficulties with that amount only, because let's say it's a life insurance, and then it got into the amount, and then their life insurance increased, and it didn't jive with what the amount was, right? So the life insurance now all of a sudden went to 100,000, and it's saying the totals for your beneficiary were 75,000, and it didn't jive. So for some, they wanted to limit it to percent only, and now you can do that. One of the features also that's associated with this is what's called notarized beneficiaries. So it's in a specific area, and inside of it, it's now called notarized beneficiaries. What it allows you to do is, if that spouse, and let's say you do have it required on the primary, if the spouse submits evidence that waives that right, you can then turn around and receive that documentation somehow. You have validated it, let's say. Then you can go in and mark them as yes, they are notarized. And what that allows you to do is, when they go in through an enrollment where they're allowed to change their, if they go into the beneficiary section, it's going to allow them to not require them to be the spouse primary. They can be contingent, they can not even show up. It allows that spouse to be waived and not tied to that. So for those that have those spousal requirements, and again, this is per, depends on which plan you have and whether or not you have the spousal requirement turned on. But if you do, this is a way to monitor and allow them sort of to get around that legally, because you've done that. Now, you cannot, there is not a place to store that documentation yet. I do know it's on the roadmap, but currently that documentation that's submitted is going to have to be stored attached to that employee just in regular documents, but it's not stored in this specific area.
Nola, there's a quick question about beneficiaries. Is there a way to allow an employee to add notes, such as person 1 50%, person 2 50%, and then something like allows equal shares to survivors? Is there a place to add notes on beneficiaries?
No, there is not.
Thank you.
I know what they're asking for, but there isn't. So just to give you a quick kind of view of what that new looks like with anytime updates. So you can see it's broken up into 3 areas when you get into the beneficiary section now. So you'll be able to see the primary section, the contingent section, and in case there's any that they added but they're not designated, if that was allowed. So they just have the beneficiary, but they haven't, labeled them as primary or contingent. One of the other areas you'll see is up above. You can now see there'll be a percentage here. So it's did their totals, their totals add up, and did their totals here add up? And of course, if they do to 100%, they'll be green. Otherwise, they won't show green. I think they show red. And again, it depends on whether you require that or not. But I think that's a nice feature again. And there's an example where there's an error, that the spouse is required to be a primary beneficiary in the plan. So this was a hard stop, let's say. So again, they need to make those changes where in this case, the spouse was put as contingent 100%. They tried to give it all, split it between the 2 kids, and nope, the primary needs to be on there. But again, that's because in this plan, you allowed one for beneficiary anytime updates, and two, you allowed that you required that the spouse designation be there. There are plans where maybe it doesn't need to be, and you can obviously then not have that as required. So hopefully that gave you at least a flavor for a few things. One is open enrollment. If you haven't looked at it in a number of years, I think this is a great time to look at it, and it's the right time in the year to look at it. You should be looking at it now. If you've never used the feature open enrollment, hopefully you can see that there was 4 basic steps, although yes, there's a lot of bells and whistles inside of each of those steps, but to turn it on and to start to play with it in your test system is fairly simple, and you're not going to wreak havoc in your benefits. It's really isolated to that open enrollment, and especially in a test system, it's not something you're going to, oh my gosh, how do I undo this all? You really can play with it and not cause any harm. And then for those of you who have been using it, hopefully you picked up a few tidbits along the way that whether it's that step enrollment, whether it's that anytime beneficiary, whether there are some administration features, whether there's some new videos or logos that you might incorporate, the new step process, hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of some of those, because I do think as much as you guys are always putting out fires and clearly moving on from one thing, and there's that dreaded, oh my God, we got to deal with open enrollment. I do think it's important that you take a moment and that you do modify it slightly, meaning to the better, because as much as folks don't like change and they don't adapt well to change, that refreshing, it does make them pay attention. It makes them be more involved in the process. And it also, I think, especially if you move it to a better model, a more intuitive model, you're going to get rewarded. You will get positive feedback. There'll be those folks, 90% of the folks are going to go, wow, it's better. And I hate to say it, but from a psychological standpoint, if they have a better experience enrolling, intuitively, it's just one of these ways, they feel that the benefits plans are better. They just do. You know how frustrated people are when they go through open enrollment. If it doesn't work well, then all of a sudden it's an influence on the benefits, even though they could be the world's greatest benefits. So I encourage you to go out there, look at some of these features, build them and test, play with them to your heart's content, and hopefully move forward in a much better product. Any other questions?
You answered them all, sir. I do have 2 follow-ups on the version for step enrollment and size image, and we'll get that out to everyone following the session.
Great. I know we have some final thoughts here. Molly, I think I'm turning it back over to you.
Yeah, I do see that someone just said, I have a question. Did you want to come off mute to ask that question, or?
Yes, that would be good.
Okay.
We have some default plans that actually provide flex credits depending upon the person. And I was wondering, would those default plans in any way be visible to the employee in any of the confirmations or any of those views so that they can see the true benefit
value
of that?
of their benefits.
Yep.
Yeah, you can showcase those and show that they are receiving that benefit. I have folks that have clients that, for example, they have the employer 100% pays for, it's automatically enrolled in short-term disability, long-term disability, if they're a management, those types of things, and absolutely they have them showing up on those current benefit displays as they go through the enrollment.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one more question, Nola. Are the features outlined today current, or are they going to be released in October?
No, everything that you saw is current and available right now.
Thank you.
I have, but I encourage you to obviously in the next few weeks or soon, they're going to showcase some. I have not been, what little I have been teased from, I didn't see, I've yet to see the full amount of any of the enhancements that are going to be related to benefits. So everything I showed you though is available today.
Thank you, Nola.
Wonderful. Thanks everybody for your questions. Thank you, Christopher, for an informative session. If you find you have further questions down the road, please keep our Coffee with Consultants offering in mind. This allows you 30 minutes of complimentary time with one of our consultants to get questions answered or even solve a pain point. You can go to our website to sign up for that, or as always, you can send me an email and I can put you in touch with somebody, and I'll drop my email again in the chat. Our August/September series continues after the Labor Day holiday on September 13th. With just a look at what's coming in the October CU for HR talent. So please get registered for that. Again, you can send me an email to register as well. And then after our September series, our next quarterly series will be February of 2025. So look for that information in January. And then next slide, we're just hopefully we'll see you at Infor Velocity in October. Please look for our team and introduce yourself. We'd love to get a chance to talk to you in person. So thanks everybody for your time, and thank you, Christopher and Candace. Again, we will send out the link to the recording to everybody that's registered. If you don't feel like you are registered and you would like the link, just go ahead and send me an email and I'll make sure to include you on that distribution. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Molly.